Ever since The Empire Strikes Back hit cinemas 34 years ago, Star Wars games have been obsessed with recreating the Battle of Hoth. There are so many cool moments that we want to play.
Flying a snowspeeder and tripping up an Imperial walker. Defending Echo Base from the ground. Even commanding an AT-AT itself.
But can a single Star Wars game even capture all of this? Or do they need to pick and choose which sides of the battle to depict? Which one does it best?
Find out as we look over 3 decades of Star Wars games that have depicted the Rebel Alliance's most catastrophic defeat, beginning with the very first Star Wars game ever made. Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back for the Atari 2600 came out 2 years after the film, and it actually skipped A New Hope entirely to strap you straight into the Battle of Hoth. The game was so basic that you didn't have harpoons and tow cables, so you just had to fly laps around each Imperial walker and blast through its armor in pursuit of a high score. This score attack focus meant it was actually impossible to win, which is totally appropriate because the Battle of Hoth is where the good guys actually lose.
Next up is the 1985 Empire Strikes Back arcade game from Atari.
There's a meteorite hit the ground near you.
This time you piloted a snowspeeder in first person and in stunning vector graphics. You also got to shoot tow cables at the AT-AT's legs to trip them up, but they went down instantly and without needing to fly circles around them, so it's not exactly the most authentic recreation of the film. That digitized speech is pretty sweet though.
The Force is with you. That is the system, and I'm sure Skywalker is with them.
7 years later, Star Wars games were still being conservative with their titles, but it was for a good reason.
The NES platformer, Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, featured levels from the whole film, rather than one particular scene. Still, its Battle of Hoth sequence diverged from platforming to side-scrolling snowspeeder combat, directly inspired by the first Atari game. But this time, your snowspeeder could crash into the foreground, and you'd continue on foot. If you reached another AT-AT, you could grapple up to its underbelly and destroy it with a grenade, just like in the film.
A few months later came Super Empire Strikes Back for the Super Nintendo.
Everything was souped up. The graphics, the difficulty, and especially the snowspeeder level. The game rendered Hoth as a quasi-3D open space reminiscent of Star Fox, and it was the first time you needed to fly your snowspeeder around an AT-AT to entangle its legs in your tow cable. But actually accomplishing this whilst grappling with the Mode 7 engine's loose interpretation of depth perception was no easy task.
Next is an on-rails shooter and one of the earliest games with full motion video, Star Wars Rebel Assault.
Rookie 1, good to have you on board. Let's get this over with.
Because this Battle of Hoth was pre-rendered, you weren't so much whizzing around the Imperial walkers as you were watching a fuzzy film and aiming a barely responsive crosshair over the footage. With no tow cables, you could only destroy the AT-ATs by endlessly blasting their hulls with lasers. Rebel Assault actually made playing the Battle of Hoth rather boring.
Shadows of the Empire had the opposite problem. Its first level, set during the Battle of Hoth, was so good that the rest of the game seemed dull by comparison.
Piloting a snowspeeder in the game's fully 3D environment for the first time was fantastic. To take down the Imperial walkers, you had to fly circles around them with your tow cable, while the camera shifted to this really awkward cinematic perspective. Though Super Empire Strikes Back did this first, it wasn't until this game, 16 years after the release of the film, that tripping up an AT-AT finally felt satisfying.
2 years after Shadows of the Empire's free-form flight, Star Wars Trilogy Arcade returned to on-rails snowspeeding.
This was the first game where the AT-ATs had location damage. As in the film, they could be destroyed by shooting a weak point in their neck. You were also told to go into attack pattern Delta several times. Purely because it's a line from the film. I mean, to this day I have no idea what attack pattern Delta actually is.
Attack pattern Delta, go now.
The same year saw the release of Rogue Squadron, an entire game inspired by the Hoth level from Shadows of the Empire.
Use your harpoons and tow cables.
Perhaps for this reason, Rogue Squadron saved its own Battle of Hoth for an unlockable bonus level. It played slightly differently, with tight canyons to fly through and an even more awkward tow cable camera. But when you had Shadows of the Empire available on the same system, it was probably a good move not to focus too much on the Battle of Hoth again.
Cable out, let her go! Another victory for Rogue Squadron.
3 years and one console generation later came Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader.
Rebel transports are preparing for evacuation.
The GameCube's greater grunt meant you could have more Imperial walkers in an even wider expanse of snow. Rogue Leader also finally got the scale of the AT-ATs right. These things were huge and actually looked like they could crush a snowspeeder under one of their enormous stomping feet. With Rogue Leader, it finally felt like we had played the definitive Battle of Hoth.
So where do you go from there? For Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike, Factor 5 got you out of your snowspeeder.
Hurry, Commander Skywalker!
You ran around as Luke Skywalker, shooting snowtroopers and riding a Tauntaun. But you could also grapple up to an AT-AT's underbelly and throw a grenade in through a series of QuickTime events.
Watch out for those AT-ATs! Try to take them down!
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Look, I see a Tauntaun down there.
It was Star Wars Battlefront 2 that finally married this on-foot gameplay with the vehicular combat that this scene is remembered for.
This is Battlefield-style combined arms warfare in the Star Wars universe, which means Battlefront 2 presented the most fully featured, intense, and immersive depiction of the Battle of Hoth. Plus, being a multiplayer game, you finally got to pilot an Imperial walker and shoot down pesky snowspeeders. Battlefront 2 also added the ability to play as Luke and Darth Vader, so you could recreate everything from the assault against the Imperial walkers
These guys are easy.
to the destruction of the shield generator, through to Vader's storming of Echo Base itself.
Feel the power of the Darth.
25 years after The Empire Strikes Back hit cinemas, it took a game like Battlefront 2 to finally realize what participating in the Battle of Hoth could be like.
With the Battlefront license now in DICE's hands, and a deeper look at the game in store for E3 this year, we could be set to realize all over again why Star Wars games haven't been able to leave this frigid planet behind.